This week on Star Trek Discovery, Captain Burnham tracks a killer to a lifeless moon. Only, that's no moon. This is a review of Choose to Live, the third episode of Star Trek Discovery's fourth season. If you're watching this before you've seen the episode, don't worry. This review is spoiler-free. If you're all caught up on the current Paramount Plus era of Star Trek, you've probably guessed from the title that this episode features those ass-kicking Romulan ninja nuns, the Qowat Milat. But Choose to Live is an appropriate title for other reasons as well, as this episode shows us multiple characters, Tilly, Book, and Gray being the main ones, choosing to live in various ways. At one point, a character explains that the Qowat Milat phrase, choose to live, is actually the shorter version of a longer saying, your path has come to an end. Choose to live. In that context, choose to live means choose a new path. And so this episode is about characters who are searching for a new path or struggling to cope with the one they're on or coming to terms with a new path they find themselves on unexpectedly or taking their first steps down a new path. Lots of path work in this episode. Choose to Live is not nearly as unified as the previous episode Anomaly. There's an A story and a B story and a C story, and also kind of a D story that mingles with the A story, and actually also an E story that mixes with the B story. The point is, there's a lot going on, and this episode lacks the focus that made the last episode so effective. But that doesn't mean Choose to Live is a bad episode. There's nothing wrong with following multiple plots as long as there's a point to it and as long as the plots themselves are interesting. And there's definitely a point to it. The various plots we follow in this episode are thematically related, paths. But in terms of how interesting the plots are in and of themselves, the mileage definitely varies. Let's start with the A story because, well, it's the A story. It gets more screen time than the others, and on paper, at least, it has the most compelling elements. A rogue member of the Qowat Milat steals a shipment of dilithium, killing a Starfleet officer in the process, and Captain Burnham is given the mission to team up with the Qowat Milat to find the killer and bring her to justice. There's action, there's the search for a criminal, there's mystery, there's suspense, there's something at stake. The new Federation president is hoping a positive resolution to this situation will help coax Ni'Var, the joint homeworld of the Vulcans and the Romulans, remember, back into the Federation. The pieces are all there. It just never quite comes together the way it should. The search for the fugitive doesn't take very long and contains no real twists or turns. The mystery our heroes encounter when they find the location to which the fugitive has fled, is solved fairly quickly, and the solution involves a trope that has frequently recurred in Star Trek, with which this episode does nothing particularly new or interesting. The conflict between our heroes and the fugitive's motivations for her actions both come down to a problem that is fixed without too much trouble, and the resolution seems to satisfy everyone except for a last-minute political compromise that clearly troubles Burnham, but which is also immediately smoothed over, at least for now. It's not that any of this is bad, but it feels flat, not terribly compelling. Tilly is one of the characters involved in this story, and she gets some nice moments of comic relief, and Mary Wiseman is as charming and delightful as ever. But overall, this part of the episode is just kind of there. The B plot, involving Stamets' continuing effort to identify the anomaly and Book's insistence on being included because of his personal connection to the destruction caused by the anomaly, promises a little more emotional depth and delivers on some of that. Stamets has a theory on what the anomaly, which he has now nicknamed the DMA for dark matter anomaly, is, but he's missing some crucial evidence. So he and Book take a trip to the Navarre Science Academy to let the folks with the pointy ears and the big brains take a look. The juxtaposition of Stamets's fussiness and impatience with the impenetrable calm of the Vulcan scientists makes for some fun moments and gives Anthony Rapp something to work with, which always leads to good results. Stamets is one of my favorite characters on the show, and he's at his best when he's annoyed or frustrated or in a situation where he feels like he knows exactly what to do, but nobody else is doing it. And this episode places him in such a situation, and it makes for an interesting few minutes, as does the interaction between Book, who is still dealing with serious emotional trauma related to the DMA, and Stamets, who feels responsible for identifying what the DMA is and figuring out how to stop it from doing any more damage. This story presents us with three emotional types. There's Stamets, who feels emotions intensely but clearly finds them inconvenient. There's Book, who recognizes that he needs to feel certain emotions, no matter how painful they may be, in order to move past them. And there are the Vulcans, who suppress their emotions, but in a way that allows them to attain serenity. It's an interesting mix that allows the show to showcase these characters and move them forward. The visit with the Vulcans is a frustrating dead end in one way, but provides a sought after breakthrough in another. And I thought it was the most successful part of this episode. The C plot involves the culmination of the efforts which began season to transfer the consciousness of Gray, who has been existing more or less as a ghost only Adira can see and hear, to a new physical body. Like the A plot, it's fairly straightforward. There's a thing that needs to happen. The characters wait for it to happen, and it happens. It needed to happen for the story to move forward, but where it goes from here is the potentially interesting part. What happens in this episode? Not so much. This episode is more about moving things from one point to the next, which feels like a necessary exercise, but isn't exactly gripping. All in all, this felt like the sort of house cleaning episode Discovery has traditionally scheduled for later in the season. There's not a lot of narrative thrust, not much urgency to anything, just a lot of checking in with various characters to see how they're doing and to move the stories they're involved with forward so the show can get to where it needs to be before whatever the next step is. Burnham is still seeking balance between the authority of the captain's chair and the compromises demanded by the Federation's political situation, and Stamets is still trying to identify what the DMA is and what to do about it. But at least Book gets some small measure of closure, and Adira and Gray are at the start of a promising new path that I'm sure will proceed smoothly from now on. I mean, come on, this is Star Trek. What could go wrong? Despite the thematic threads tying everything together, this isn't a terribly cohesive episode, especially when compared with the previous one, nor do I think it will prove all that memorable. But it has its moments, and it's hopefully setting us up for better things to come. So, those are my thoughts about this episode. Let me know what you thought. But remember, my review was spoiler free, so if you're going to include spoilers in your comments, please include a spoiler warning so that folks who haven't seen the episode yet can avoid spoilers if they want. If you want to support my channel, go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron, or click the join button to become a member. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week for a review of episode 4.